Hello, 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 hello. Is that okay?
Okay, we're going to the side. Emma.
Hi, and welcome back to Safety Stream, a three-part discussion on safety preparation for freelance journalists, brought to you by the Roy Peck Trust, Frontline Club, and Frontline Freelance Register. This is our second session. It's going to be talking about creating a communications plan. I'm Max. I'm from the Roy Peck Trust. I work as a writer and researcher there. I'm joined by James Brabazon, a freelance journalist and filmmaker, and Emma Beals, a freelance journalist and member of the Frontline Freelance Register Governing Committee. You can follow this all on Twitter, following the Safety Stream hashtag. Commit to the, speak about the conversation now. So the first question I'd like to address, James, is what is a communications plan? Can you give us a brief explanation of that? And what's its purpose?
Right, a communications plan is pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. It's the plan that you draw up that describes how you will keep in contact with people outside of the location that you're working in. So you're a freelancer, you're on location, you're working, and you need to keep in contact with people outside of the area where you're working. So that could be, you could be communicating with your commissioning editor, it could be with your series producer, it could be with your print editor, it could be someone who you've delegated to be your point of contact. And the point of the communications plan is to govern how you'll be in communication with them, by what method, when, and what should be done if communication from you ceases or there is a crisis or a situation that needs to be managed. So in other words, it's how you communicate what you're doing back to people who are able to help you do something about it.
Okay, so Emma, in your experience as a freelancer, when you're working out who to contact, who's going to be the main key person in your communication plan, what kind of qualities are you looking for in the person? Who generally do you use to contact?
Well, that's a tricky one for a lot of freelancers because you don't necessarily have an editor or a safety expert who is responsible for you and whose job it is to sit there and monitor your communications. So quite often you're relying on a friend or a colleague, and it's really important when you're choosing them. I mean, I personally use a good friend who's an editor or someone who's in the business who's not currently on assignment, and sometimes that can take a little while to find out exactly who that is. So you want that person to have to be very diligent about making sure that you have contacted them or not. You also want them to be someone that is professional and cool under pressure because, you might be using your girlfriend or your mum or whoever it is, and they might be someone that's going to panic if you don't call them, who's not going to think, cool and clear. What you want to be thinking about is not only is this person going to diligently monitor my communications, but is this the person that I want on my side if, like James was saying, your communication ceases or there is a crisis situation, because they're going to be that first person that makes that call.
What kind of information do you think you should be briefing them with before you go?
Well, once you've done your risk assessment, you would have a pretty good overview of some of the things that might happen to you. You'd have in your mind sort of the top 2 or 3 things that might mean that you're out of communication or that may happen to you while you're on your particular trip. And the easiest thing and what I do is put myself in that person's shoes and think, okay, if I'm that person and I haven't called, what would I want me to do, basically? And just write down a list, write exactly what you would want to happen. And that depends on where you are and how dangerous it is. Because in some places you're going to want action to be taken within half an hour of you failing to check in somewhere. In other places it might be okay for it to go a few hours, but that all needs to be established in your communications plan. So, after an hour do this, after 4 do this, and then you want to build in something like a dead man switch, which says, after 12 hours,
sure,
just open the floodgates and go for a break. You want a really clear action plan for that person, so they know exactly what to do, because they may not have as much information as you do, and you just need to make sure that they do.
Presumably you're in the environment, the place you're going to, the kinds of areas you're going to be traveling to will make a big difference. How do you adapt to these kind of things? What do you do?
Well, some locations require a greater frequency of communication than others, and that's usually dependent upon the threat profile of the region that you're going to. So, for example, quite often all that you really need from a communications plan, in effect, in reality, on the ground, is that you've agreed that at 9 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the evening, you will check in back to the person that's monitoring the plant for you and say, yep, I'm here, it's all good, it's fine, this is my plans for today, this is what I'm doing, give them the details, and check in again in the evening, good days filming, good days whatever I've been doing, fine. That's normally what the practical implication of a communications plan is. But then, in the same way that risk assessment is dynamic, communications plans are also dynamic. So it might be the case that you're based in a relatively safe city, somewhere that's not particularly hostile or threatening, and you might actually only need to check in once a day. But there might be a part of that city which is extremely dangerous, where you're going to go off and take a day's filming into that part of that city. So you might want to say, right, okay, well, I'm leaving at this time, and I'm travelling to this place, and I'll be working there, and I expect to be done by 4 o'clock. I will have been in contact with you by 5. So for today, we're going to modify the plan because I'm going to this specific place. If it's a place where there's a very high kidnap threat, you want to increase the frequency of your check-ins irrespective of what you're doing. So rather than maybe checking in once every 12 hours, you might be checking in anything from between once every 6 hours to every hour, or to the point where you might need to be using a spot tracker, which is continuously checking in for you. So it's very much predicated on the threat profile of where you're going. But the key thing is, once you have a plan in place, it has to be followed.
Sure.
There's no point having a plan if you're not following it.
Okay. How would you want this communications as key contact to react if something did go wrong in the eventuality? What kind of plans do you lay down beforehand in this preparation?
Well, again, it's site-specific, it's story-specific. I mean, the brutal reality of working in a hostile environment is that actually there's quite often nothing that can be done externally. A communications plan can be a very good way of making people on the outside feel warm and fuzzy and somehow in control of what you're doing on the ground. But if you're in a catastrophic incident in country, practically what assistance can be given from behind the desk in London is necessarily minimal. And I think it's important that people understand that a communications plan and the risk assessment that goes with it they don't make you bulletproof. Right? This is not it's not going to stop bad things happening to you necessarily, but what it does mean is that there's a system in place that can mitigate the worst effects of it. So, for example, having someone assist you, extract you from somewhere you've been injured to somewhere that you can receive medical treatment. Now, that might be relevant in one scenario, in another scenario it might not be. So what you need to do is, in a site-specific way, list out, okay, these are the threats that I face, this is what might go wrong, and I want you to do these things in this order. And it doesn't matter if the person that has the communications plan is experienced or not. It needs to be very clearly written out so that the essential information, who do I call, what number am I calling, what do I want them to do, is written out in bullet point form. I can't reach this person on the phone. Who's the next person? What's their number? What do I want them to do? Like, black and white. You need this to be brutal. You need a communications plan to be understandable and to be acted upon by an idiot.
Sure.
It's got to be completely self-explanatory and totally... The point at which someone's looking through a document, which number do I call because something bad's happened, is it this person, is it that? It's failed. It's got to be absolutely clear.
Or the other thing that I see quite a bit is so-and-so hasn't checked in, what do I do? So someone will call a friend and say, oh, I haven't heard from so-and-so, or they've got a phone number for the fixer's not answering, what do I do now? And what needs to happen in those circumstances is so huge, and it takes so much longer and puts someone at such a greater risk, whether it's an injury or a kidnapping or some other incident. If you're spending sort of 48 hours trying to work out where they are, what's happened, when were they last seen, what's going on, then you've lost a huge amount of time, and that time could be really, really important in terms of securing your safety and getting you out of the situation.
Also, as well, with the communications plan, it's vital that the various different people that might be communicated with aren't all with you on location.
Sure. So that's what I was going to ask next.
If the phone number to call, or the email, or the Skype, or whatever, for everyone that someone externally can call, are all the people who are in the vehicle with you.
Yeah. So what kind of people do you want to be on your communications plan? You know, outside of the people you're with, what other people? Is it colleagues? You know, family? What kind of people do you want?
Well, it's very story specific. So,
Sure.
I mean, normally, like for me, I would have, you know, my number on location. First of all, if I haven't checked in or there's a communications failure, before you go nuts calling everyone else, just call my cell phone. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Just eradicate problems like that first. Or my reporter. Then I've got my fixer, my translator, and my driver, because they're going to be the people who've been nearest to me. But then I might have someone, say for example I was working in Syria and I'm working with a translator. Perhaps that translator knows someone who's stationed up at the border. Well, let's give that person's number as well, because that person's in quite a good position perhaps to come and try and look for us or find us or coordinate with people. But do these people speak English? Can you communicate with them? It's important as well in the communications plans for Arabic speaker only, or only speak Spanish. There's no point you trying to ring up someone and you can't communicate with them.
And make it easy for your contact person. So if all of your contacts are Arabic speaking, give the phone number of someone you know that they can access really easily to make those calls for you, or make those calls for them. Because again, if they're scrambling around trying to find a translator on short notice, you've lost time. It's all about trying to reduce the amount of time you're losing with FAF. And it might be someone that's upset and they're a bit panicked. You haven't checked in. They're not going to necessarily be thinking really orderly. And it will probably give you a little bit of peace of mind to go, okay, well, it's been an hour. I know that this and this and this are happening. Okay, it's been 3 hours, this and that. It gives you a little bit of control in a situation you may not have much control over, which might keep you calm enough to sort of get you through the worst of something.
You shouldn't underestimate as well the amount of detail that you need to put into your check-ins. So, for example, if you were travelling from one part, we'll use Syria as an example, but it could be anywhere, one part of Syria to another by vehicle. You need to be really specific about this. So I'm travelling in a Toyota Hilux with this registration plate, which is white, and I'm travelling from this town at this time on this route in this direction for this many kilometres to this town, and I expect to arrive here at this time. And then you've got your check-in windows. If I haven't checked in after an hour, you do this. After 3 hours, you do this. After 12 hours, you do this. And that's really important, because if you're in that vehicle and there's never mind shell fire, there's an accident, there's a vehicle collision. The more information that you have that's been given to someone who's looking for you, the better place they're going to be able to find you. They're no longer looking for a journalist somewhere in northern Syria. They're looking for someone in a white Hilux on this road. And that can transform the amount of time it takes to find you from potentially days down to hours. And that time, especially if you're looking at a kidnap scenario, checking in regularly is vital. If no one hears from you for 3 days, and at the beginning of that 3 days you've been lifted, you can be almost anywhere on earth.
Yeah.
If someone knows you've been taken after a couple of hours, it massively restricts the geographical area that you may have ended up in, which is the main thing that is going to help get you back. Okay.
And what kind of information would you include in this communications plan about the team you're actually travelling with at the time? You know, how is it the same? You have to go into extreme amount of details. What kind of information would you put in there?
Well, ideally as much information as you can, but we'll talk a little bit later in digital security about how you might communicate that information a little bit more securely, because you obviously
Yeah, of
don't
course,
want bits of paper with all sorts of personal details about your fix, or people that may be putting themselves at risk to assist you in your circumstance. But as much information as you can give someone, really. I mean, if you're staying with your fixer's family, if you can provide phone numbers for those people, if any information you can provide, like you're saying, descriptions of cars, descriptions of what this person looks like, a photo, even if once you get there you manage to snap a photo of the people you're with, send it on, anything like that is going to be really helpful.
Okay, so I think we're just going to finish with a bit of top advice, you'd say, from this discussion in general when filling communications plan. First, Emma, do you want to go first?
Have one, really important starting point. Follow it.
Sure.
And it's okay to be a control freak about what you want this person to do when you've got, absolutely plan it in excruciating detail. Don't feel bad about looking like you're a little bit crazy. Put yourself in their shoes and make it as easy as possible for them.
How about you, James?
Yeah, I'd say make your communications plan realistic. Draw up something that you're actually going to adhere to, and also consider the fact that all risk assessment follows one of the immutable laws of physics, which is that all actions have equal and opposite reactions. And quite often, things that you do to try and make your life safer have implications that have the reverse consequence than you had hoped. So, for example, in Syria, I was finding that in order to make my daily check-ins, I had to leave the very nice, safe, secure basement where I was sleeping, which was my best protection against incoming artillery, and walk up into the street with my sat phone to make the check-in. The most dangerous thing I was doing on location every day was making my check-in call. So at that point, clearly that's not working. So then you need to be dynamic about it and reassess your communications plan and tailor it for what's actually going to work. We couldn't have foreseen that was the case. Once it becomes obvious, you need to change it and do it. So don't be afraid to change the plan, but communicate the change. So everyone understands what you're doing.
Okay, well, thank you for joining in on this safety stream. If you want to get more information about the communications plan or the template, you can go to the Rory Pett Trust website, as well as the Frontline Freelance Register website, which you're streaming from now. You can continue the discussion using the hashtag SafetyStream, and at 3 p.m. we'll be talking a bit more about digital security and safe communications digitally, some of the issues that came up in this. Thanks.